Hey guys, Dov here, back with another entry in my Meta Lords series. Today we're talking about the big, the bad, the ugly Sarthorael, the Everwatcher, long been one of, if not forever been, the most, or if not one of the most competitive. In many people's opinion, he has been forever the most competitive Lord for the Warriors of Chaos, even though he himself is actually a Demon of Chaos, a greater Demon of Tzeentch. And let's take a look. Similar to the Fanchantress that we looked at last time, a big part of his competitiveness comes in the fact that he is a caster lord, for one, Lore of Metal, which is a very solid Lore of Magic, 25% magic resistance and 50% missile resistance. This has been nerfed several times over the years, but let's take a look at the rest of the builds first. For Warriors of Chaos, we've got Big Bird double Shaggoth, so quite heavy on the monster department. And that means we'd expect relatively light infantry here. We've got a bunch of Marauders, Mirror Guard, Demon Spew as well. Against the Skaven, pretty solid picks. Some Poison Hounds, Marauder Horsemen. Out to the periphery for the Skaven. They've got a Bell, 4 Rat Ogres, bunch of Death Glow Bombers, which I actually quite like. Some Warp Grinders in the front line, interestingly enough. Some in the back line. Looks like we've also got Chaos Chariots way out there on the side. Absolutely wild stuff. Big Bird approves. So Big Bird, of course, brings a lot to the table besides just the fact that he is, has metal and resistances. He also is unbreakable, which is massive. That really can't be stated how huge unbreakable is, especially for like a monster caster lord. Magic attacks, 60 melee attack, 40 charge, 440 weapon strength, only 30 armor, but decent enough combat stats, and his splash attacks as well have crazy animations that hit a whole bunch of targets. He kind of rolls around on roller skates also. You'll see as he kind of ping-pongs around. He has this weird mass profile where he can get knocked over by other big monsters, but he can basically path through like infinite cavalry and infantry. It's really quite wild. But here, Shaggoth attacking on the flank out here. We've got another Shaggoth kind of out here, looking to get probably on those Rat Ogres, currently getting jabbed by the Marauder Horsemen. A nice Overcast Final Transmutation. Miscast damage does deal magic damage, so Sarthorael will take a bit less from that than other lords will, but he still takes some damage from the miscast there. Gonna do a whole bunch, especially to the Rat Ogres here that are caught up in this blob, but of course it's mainly targeted on the Grace here. Does a good amount of HP damage there. That Final Transmutation also pretty good against the stuff like these Deathglow Bombardiers, who currently are getting ran over a little bit, but oh man, look at this fire. Definitely some horrendous friendly fire being done there, but it's mostly just to these chaff units, so that's fine. But I actually really like the pick of Death Globes. Probably going to be doing an underrated video about these guys relatively soon, but oh, nice. A summon there. Even though it's just on Marauders, that dreaded 13th summons up some Storm Vermin to help support against all these monsters currently running rampant over this main line. Unholy Clamor to keep the leadership and vigor of those Rat Ogres up. But they are suffering pretty badly. There are quite a few Gutter Runners here, though, and Night Runners who can continue skirmishing. And yeah, the Death Globes here getting set and finishing off the Demon Spew there. Able to stay solid. Same thing with these guys. Despite all the pressure, they're able to kind of get reset here and probably going to be able to keep firing. And the Shaggoths are slowly getting worn down. Big Bird as well, taking a little bit of damage from Miscast, but now drops at a nicely placed Searing Doom. It is just on the Summon Storm Vermin, but that's fine. Just helps take out a bit more of their HP. Probably would have been slightly better to try and drop it on the weapons teams, but it's tough to say. Oh man, yeah, the Death Globes firing in. Very, very important. Also just wrecking that Summon Storm Vermin. It's been a rough day for them, but they do actually shatter those Marauders there. And things are looking a little dicey for Chaos. They've got a handful of mobile units, but the fact that Big Bird is, totally resolute, just absolutely refuses to run from anything. Except sometimes he does choose to run from things, if you know what I mean. Yeah, he's going to help these Marauders here with the Terror. Should be able to terror out away these Gutter Runners and Night Runners. That's a good amount of value seen off there, and he's not going to take too much damage in the process. Does have to be careful. He's a little squishy in melee. Does have a good amount of HP, but still is not like, he's not going to stand up to something like, in this matchup, like a Hell Pit Abomination, or even like Griffin Lords, Dragon Lords, stuff like that. A lot of top tier Horse Lords even could probably take him on, but being that he's unbreakable and he's very fast also, 60 speed baseline, but that kind of is a little bit misleading. It's because his charge animations, if you can charge between different targets, ridiculously fast. Like, if he issued a charge order here on these Skaven Slave Spears, or like right here, exactly, look at him just sweep across the field, ridiculous wings flapping. It's quite fast. It gets maybe up to even 90 speed. I'm not sure. I haven't actually like measured in-game. It's kind of hard to do. It's possible, but I want to say it's close to 90 speed in terms of his charge speed. Look at that, just flapping on in, beak wide open, just absolutely screaming. It's a nice little right there. And that one, that's probably my favorite attack animation, but long been one of my favorite lords in the game. Personally, I'm super stoked for Demons of Tzeentch, most of all of the demons in the as yet unannounced Cold War Warhammer 3. But Tzeentch definitely the one I'm most excited for. Big Bird's currently the only representation we've got there, and still fighting. This one Shaggoth also reasonably healthy. There's some Rat Ogres here. Still those Death Globes also. Man, credit, I think this is Get Up Mule is the Skaven player. Credit to him keeping these Death Globes safe and online this whole time. Very impressive, and they are just wrecking shop. Oh man, look at these Mirror Guard just getting melted. Love it. Absolutely love it. What you get for worshipping Slaanesh. Anyway, up on the high ground, things are going less well for the Ratty Boys as the double Terror Monster kicks in, once again sending the Skaven scattering into the sands. And there we go. Poison Hounds also coming over as well. They actually haven't gotten involved too much until this late game, but that's just fine. They can kind of be the shock to help with the terror routes and to chase things off, since Big Bird has a little bit of a harder time chasing things off as a single entity. Like here, nice shock damage there, and they're gone. Big Bird then turns around to stop up the Rat Ogres, although they still will do a significant amount of damage to the Hounds, and if the Hounds are out here, that's bad, because they'll just go straight off the side. Looks like they're going to stabilize there. We've also got the Demon Spew, somehow still 8 of them, and come provide that debuff at the very least, but nice final transmutation placement here. This is going to hit all of the Grinders, all of the Rat Ogres, all of the low model count units, immediately terror out several of them. Oh man, the Death Globes firing in here, just destroying literally everything. That's going to send the Hounds packing at the very least, and suddenly it's looking pretty dicey, potentially. The Dragon Ogre Shaggoth here taking the brunt of that fire, but again, Big Bird, with his magic and missile resistance, will take less damage from these Death Globes. It's still not going to be comfortable, but him plus the Shaggoth here together can at the very least, you know, keep these guys disrupted. Try and finish off this Gracier, perhaps? Let's see. Danger close firing in with the globes. These guys could hit anyone, but nice Searing Doom placement forces them out of position. And at the very least, we'll hit a couple of unit models there, perhaps. But even just forcing them to move, not allowing them to fire, good enough in and of itself. Nice summon from the Plague Priest, though. Lore of Plague summons up some Clan Rats, keeping that Vermintide rolling. Speaking of rolling, one Chaos Chariot here with 800 HP actually just to itself is going to come through, knock over this poor Skaven assassin, do a little bit of damage to him, then immediately run away. Pretty typical Chaos stuff, but Chaos is going to face a little bit of a problem here if everything routes except Big Bird, perhaps. Big Bird can take it though. I mean, right now he's doing fine. I say fine, actually taking a decent amount of damage, but the globes aren't too accurate this close, and they will end up doing quite a bit of friendly damage once again. Chaos Chariot, though, not really liking the situation, down to about 600 HP, and Big Bird with his magic damage, ooh, you see, does a really good hit there on the assassin. The magic damage is pretty key against certain targets that have physical resistance, certain other single entities especially, someone like this Skaven assassin or Snitch, for example. Even like Lewin, right? He has physical resistance baseline. He can get magic resistance from Lion Shield, but baseline he's just got Blessing of the Lady, right? So Malekith as well, Marathi. There's quite a few actually of the kind of higher tier lords that have a bit of physical resistance. Ooh man, another dreaded 13th there. Almost blasts Big Bird himself, but he manages to avoid it. And now, though, he's got a problem. This Shaggoth is gone. The Rat Ogres do get terrified, but it's just Big Bird now. I think, technically, I don't think Chaos has hit army losses quite yet, but it is pretty much army losses, right? It's just Big Bird left. Granted, look at this. Also, the Grey Seer Lore of Plague is routed. Didn't actually take that hit there. Managed to avoid taking the damage. That one, same thing. Probably just going to get chased off here by Big Bird. He doesn't care too much about the Death Globes like we've seen. But the Rat Ogres and the Storm Vermin, especially in melee, that big health unit of Storm Vermin could wear him down. So chasing off this Grey Seer is definitely a valid play here, especially to try and avoid the engagement as long as possible for the Storm Vermin. Oh man, and I think the Globes actually just finished off a Rat Ogre model there, or no, he's just knocking them around. Okay, he's just knocking them around. Now charging through, outmaneuvers the Skaven infantry, gets home a charge on the Death Globes. Now can immediately ping-pong over to the next target. They're routed, and the summoned Storm Vermin suddenly drop. Of course, they're summons. They're only going to last a certain amount of time, and things are looking decent for Big Bird. If he can finish off this Assassin, which does have a Rival Hide Talisman currently active, but with the charge bonus, he should be able to still get a hit. Ooh, these Rat Ogres come in. He says, you know what, maybe I'll actually chase off these Death Globes. Maybe that's a better idea to avoid this while the Rival Hide, but ends up actually getting caught there. Says, you know what, okay, stand your ground, stand or die, terror routes. Actually, I think, does he kill the assassin here? No, not quite. Terror routes the assassin, and then all of a sudden, just like that, despite the balance of power, everything terror routes for the Skaven, and that's game, because that's Skaven for you. So, great game by Zero and Get Up Mule, both super fun one back and forth. That's kind of the power. One of the main powers of Unbreakable. I guess not main, but you can actually win technically after you've hit army losses. Sometimes not always, often you can't, but sometimes it's worth playing it out even if you have technically hit army losses, because somebody like Big Bird or Orion can tank out a finish surprisingly well. And how about 188 kills for Big Bird? Between the Searing Dooms, the Final Transmutations, just you know, motorboating around on his rollerblades there, his skates. Likewise for the Shaggoth, 91, 52 kills there, 147 for the late game Hound deployment, very nicely done. Only 38 for the Chariot, but still good disruption, 96 for these Marauder Horsemen. The heavy infantry, though, I guess pretty heavy, sort of mid-tier to elite infantry. Mirror Guard and Demon Spew got hard countered by those Bombardiers, and just the kills on the Bombardiers in general, 100, 104 against a relatively small model count Chaos army. Looks like they did a lot of the heavy lifting. 50 kills as well for these gunner runners with poison and an XP chevron, excellent there. A couple of Rat Ogres got some chevrons, 59 for the Grey Seer of Plague, of course. So fun stuff. Get Up Mule played it very well, just wasn't quite able to finish off Big Bird there in the late game, which I'm sure is very, very frustrating for him. But as a fan of Big Bird, yeah, that's just how it goes sometimes. So just to kind of finish up with things here, Warriors of Chaos are an interesting faction in that they're definitely a rush faction. They can play some kite, they can play some different things, some hit and run style, but first and foremost, they are a rush faction, and often that means you're going to be facing like defensive missile play, which I don't know if that's necessarily the strongest, but in general, you do rely a lot on getting quick terror routes to break different parts of your opponent's army, at least against factions which are susceptible to terror. And likewise, the missiles thing is pretty real against a lot of factions, even if it's not you know, stationary missiles, like against Dark Elves, for example, you'll often see a lot of kiting missile play, right? So the missile resistance ends up being just kind of de facto super competitive in a lot of matchups. For that reason alone, the magic resistance helps too. You combine those two together, and again, something like Warp Lightning Cannons or those Death Globe Bombs going to be doing minimal amounts of damage to Sarthorael. Same thing again, Empire, Hammer of Witches, or Solar Engines for the Lizardmen. Anything like that. They're doing very minimal amount of damage to him. In terms of spell selection, Lore of Metals, probably one of the most underrated lores in the game. It's very, very good. This right here, Searing Doom, excellent, especially for supporting cavalry engagements. It seems to do a lot more damage for some reason, and even against like very heavy cavalry, like you know, like Empire Knights or Demigryph Knights that have 110, 120 plus armor. This Searing Doom will still do quite effective damage to them. Likewise, Plague of Rust, probably the most well-known spell from this lore, if not Final Transmutation. Just an excellent armor debuff, useful in basically every single build and every matchup, just about. You're going to see maybe 1 or 2 high armor units that you might want to counter at least. Gehenna's Hound's decent, I think, against Skaven or other Horde. Skaven and Coast, I would say, like kind of the missile Horde builds that you might take Sarthorael against. Gehenna's Hounds is great for disrupting those infantry missile units and just kind of creating more chaos, unintended, in your opponent's backline. This one here, Glittering Robe, is a spell. I haven't actually had an opportunity to use this too much, but in theory, it's a pretty good spell. Plus 60 armor, only 6 winds of magic, 44 seconds. It seems on paper to be decent, just that oftentimes you want to use your magic on other spells in this lore. But against, I'm thinking, a faction that maybe doesn't have the best armor piercing, like let's say Bretonnia or High Elves are some that are often, have that reputation. Maybe using this Glittering Robe on Sarthorael himself to put him up to 90 would be pretty good, but doing something like putting a Shaggoth from 70 up to 130 would be even better, in my opinion. Just because up at that 130 range, they're getting, minimal amounts of the non-armor piercing damage is even getting through at all. Usually the die roll will favor the 100% mitigation at that point, so it's good in either of those scenarios, at least on paper. I haven't actually tried it, but in theory it seems like it could be decent. Likewise, overcasting it for 12 winds of magic to give it an area of effect, decent 40-meter area of effect. I haven't tried this, but in theory, if you're running, in the past I've run like very mobile kind of Warhound hit squads where you take like 5 hounds and just swarm a specific part of your opponent's army that's maybe a little bit weaker and lighter. You could, if you wanted to give these guys a little bit more protection on that, give them that Glittering Robe, and suddenly they're up to, what is that, 75 armor, which is decent. I mean, it's not great, but for something like Hounds especially, where they might take some incidental hits from low tier melee units because they're low melee defense, and maybe your opponent will be firing in with some cheaper missiles as well, perhaps. I don't know, kind of those lower tier attacks you'll be getting some better mitigation against. Anyway, this is not all about Lore of Metal, but you get the idea. Final Transmutation, you know the deal on this one. It's great. Says single target, but that means it's really good against any low model count entities, anything from like cavalry below, any real big blob of enemy units, but especially blobs of like monstrous infantry or weapons teams. And Transmutation of Light, I wish this lasted a little bit longer. I actually think this is kind of cost inefficient in terms of winds of magic for what you actually get out of it. It's only 38 seconds, does have a pretty big area of effect, but it's really, I mean, minus 24 melee attack is awesome, but the fact that it doesn't last very long, I'm not the biggest fan of. I think it's decent, but it's not super cost efficient. But I actually kind of want to play around with Glittering Robe a bit more and see how that does. Also has Power Scroll and Scroll of Leeching. These are good in niche situations where you maybe want to get like a double Leg of Rust for maximum uptime, or Scroll of Leeching if you're against faction you think might take a big expensive spell. Like, I don't know, maybe, it's hard to say, but basically you use this after your opponent casts a big expensive spell and they wouldn't be able to cast anything for a while. I don't know if that's necessarily always worth it to bring, but just in and of itself, like, it doesn't seem like there's a lot going on here. Just standard die, Arcane Conduit, which is nice, but just Lore of Metal on an unbreakable monster with magic attacks, great animations, and great resistances. It's kind of Chaos in a nutshell. Like, it's kind of basic. Warriors of Chaos, as I would say, as a faction, very much kind of basic, but very strong. So hopefully you guys enjoyed that. If you do like this sort of content, be sure to like, subscribe, hit that bell notification button. Every time I upload a new video, you'll be notified. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you next time.